Hello, everybody. Welcome to the training, learning, and development community. Happy Tuesday to you all out there. Let's see, we've got a live audience going. We've got Trish is here and Carlita. Peacock is here. Cindy Nagel, nice to see you. Yang, Michelle Shea, and let's see, I saw Rebecca down there. Lisa just jumped in. Thanks for joining today. We've got a great TLD cast for you with Danny Ortegon, who Danny has spoken here on this broadcast in the past. And we're going to talk a little bit about his background to get started. But the topic is understanding and adapting to organizational dynamics when leading e-learning development, which is, long title. And this is stuff that I think is really, really important. When Danny sent over sort of a summary of what he was going to discuss today, I'm like, okay, this isn't something that we typically get into. These are things that like only an established vet would be able to share this type of advice. And so I'm really, really grateful to Danny for coming in and sharing his knowledge. And so we're going to start out. Danny, I want you to just talk about like, what's your background exactly?
Sure.
Yeah.
Hi, Luis. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me on. I know we're like 25 minutes out of a 30-minute session.
Something like that.
I want to be cognizant of the time. Yeah, so my background is in education and technology. Years and years ago, I started out in the technology realm working as a field engineer. And long story short, I got involved working with an R&D group. And one of the things we found out was you had your hardware people on one side of the room, you had your software people on the other side of the room. And we would develop the hardware because I was on the hardware side, and we'd throw not literally, we'd figuratively throw the device to the other side of the wall. And, hey, let's let the software guys figure it out. And it was mostly guys back then too. And what I said to my boss was, wow, they're really struggling to understand how this device works. Somebody should train them on that. And this is before the idea of what was corporate training even a thing. And I had a great boss, and he said, you know what, why don't you train them, figure out how to do that. So I ended up building instructor guides, participant guides, materials, all that stuff before I even knew what they were called. And so that kind of piqued my interest that there's this whole part of how we do our work where we need to do a better job of communicating what's important and why it's important. And so I kind of transitioned out of kind of the strict technology world into the education side, got a master's degree, worked for a financial services firm, worked for in the manufacturing world, worked in the consulting world, worked with a specialty pharmacy group, which is a very unique place. And the whole focus was on how can I help and partner with my customers, my clients, whatever you want to call them, so they could figure out how to train and educate their constituents better.
No, that's great. And so what you're going to be talking about today, what qualifies you exactly to be able to offer this advice?
Well, I would say, a few things qualify. The school of hard knocks, to be a consultant and to talk about e-learning, which I did, 20 plus years ago, before it was really something. I really had to understand what the challenges were, how to communicate what those challenges were, and build relationships with the people who could make or break it. And that was something that I learned as being an engineer, where you had what was called a design review. And your idea had to be posted up in front of some very smart people who would just poke holes in everything that you said. So you had to develop a thick skin and develop a way to communicate what's important and why it's important in a very short period of time. So when the e-learning stuff started to really happen, I wasn't afraid to jump in there and say, well, there's this thing called the internet, and this is with early browsers. I need to learn what that's about, because from what I'm reading, what people are telling me outside of my organization, this is the future. And so I was able to be successful in a very kind of old-fashioned financial services company to say, look, you're developing all this software and you're sending it out to your clients, and you don't want to train them, but you want to give them some sort of materials. Why don't we build some online help functions that they're built in, the task specific, that will follow what your clients are using and give them help when they need to, so that they don't feel left out on their own, And so if I can come up with a strategy to make that happen, everyone will be much happier than if you have to send, hundreds of people out to the field. So that was like kind of the first time where I kind of started to get an understanding of there's this melding of education, technology, and to me, the big part is how do I help my leaders, my constituents, get their people trained to know what they need to know.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't normally, we don't normally have conversations about e-learning projects where we're talking about the importance of human relationships when you're leading or managing an actual e-learning project. So I thought that was really interesting when you sent that over, just talking about the human element and being able to establish that. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go ahead and just sort of minimize my video, and I'm going to get you, I'm going to have you just sort of lead us into this conversation.
Okay, thanks you, Luis. And yep. Anytime you need to jump in or anybody has a question or I'm not communicating, just please do, because I would like this to be a conversation where I'm sharing kind of the lessons that I've learned, and hopefully it will help folks to connect some ideas about how to think about the relationships with their clients. So I know it's a mouthful of a title, but the whole idea here is kind of set the background is that the e-learning world has changed tremendously over the last several years. There's tons of money and resources that are being spent. A lot, expectations are really high. And I think often when we deal with our leaders, when we deal with the decision makers, they don't always understand what the tools are, what the methodologies are, what all the stuff that we like and we think is cool. What does it mean? For them, they want to know, I have some salespeople, I have some manufacturing people, I have marketing people, I have people in the healthcare world. I need them to get to from where they are now to where they need to be, and to learn and function in a much better way than they have right now. So their questions are always back to me is, Danny, what can you do to help me? And I had to really think about, how do I communicate this cool stuff that we're doing in the e-learning world or the technology world into the language that makes sense to them? And so I had to develop that based on feedback I got from my managers, feedback I got from the leaders, and by building relationships with people that have those kind of what I would call crucial conversations. So that's kind of how I kind of got to where I was. It's kind of ironic. I would say that I have a strong technology background, but I see that the leverage point for me is developing partnerships and relationships with people one-on-one or one-to-many by having communications on what you want to call soft skills, if you want to call it that. So it's more than just the technology. It's more than just the methodology. It's building a relationship where you can bring these tools and these techniques in, and you have a partnership with folks that are who hold the purse strings or can make the go or no go decision that you want to kind of connect with and help them get to the next point. So I just want to jump in because I know that I'm really rambling here, but basically there's 3 points that I wanted to share. And this is based on my experiences as an independent consultant, as an internal person working on the team, working across financial services, manufacturing, in a consulting role, in specialty pharmacy, to kind of help me connect and work with my partners or my clients, whatever you may want to call them, to develop a better chance of making an e-learning solution work. So the first of these is objectives is kind of understanding your customer structure, their people, their processes, their best practices. And the idea here is that if you're an e-learning leader, if you have a team, or if you're an independent, you have what I call KSEs, or it's probably known as KSEs. You have knowledge, you have skills, and you experiences. And these are all couched in the terms of an e-learning developer. And you're going to be very conversant on that. Your team's going to be very conversant on that. Odds are your customer, your clients aren't. So to me, one of the key things you want to do is develop a way to communicate to your customer, your client, what skills, what knowledge, what experiences you and your team can bring to bear to help them solve and understand what the learning challenges are, to develop a learning solution, and that you're communicating to them in language that they understand. And that, to me, that's the first part of understanding who they are by communicating in the language that they're familiar with. And then you're starting to build that relationship where you are truly partnering as you're moving from what learning solution that I have in place now, where do I want it to be, or what do I want to improve, or do I even want to do it this way? Is to have these conversations and to build these relationships is important, to look beyond the tools, beyond the methodology, which we all know is really cool and we really love, but oftentimes I don't think our leaders really understand what it means all the time. And it's our jobs, I think, as learning professionals to partner with them and help them understand so we don't become order takers. Because that's a lot of the feedback I've heard over the years, is that oftentimes the learning folks are either part of HR or not part of the frontline folks, and they're viewed as order takers. Here's this order, build me some learning, don't spend a lot of money, and let me know when it's successful. And then off they go. And unfortunately, that's part of probably everybody's experience, and it's very difficult to overcome. But I think there are ways to overcome that and build relationships and develop some skills to connect with your leaders, to become partners and help them focus on the ideas that you bring to the table and how you're going to help them solve their learning challenges in a way that makes sense to them. And
so Danny, let me ask you this. So understanding
Sure.
this first point, understanding the structure, how important is that in as far as the overall process is concerned? Is this something you should put a ton of allocate a lot of resources towards that, or how much time should you be spending to getting that understanding?
I think it varies. I mean, I can tell you that my last two experiences were with a K through 12 education company, from before that a higher ed company, and I had to spend a lot of time getting to know the K through 12 company because they already had a methodology that was paper-based and these huge binders, and they were working in hundreds of schools across the country, and their methodology was solid. In fact, they were in the top 10 school districts in the country. I mean, that's not an easy thing to do. But I had really no idea why their methodology was important to them. And by having conversations about them with them to learn who they are and what they perceive their goals to be, I could recognize that what they're proposing, and they may not say it this way, they're proposing a blended learning solution that's facilitated by a teacher and a student that uses technology that we didn't even know what it would look like yet, and that would parallel what a student and teacher would see in a binder. So there's a lot going on there. And my job was to help them articulate that and to conceive what that might look like, and then partner with them to find a technology vendor to make it a reality. And so I had to spend a lot of time sort of partnering with them and educating them and actually making them feel comfortable, even though they had a mandate from schools and from states that you need to build a technology or digital version of what you have. They really didn't know what that meant. They just knew it had to happen, and they didn't want to get overwhelmed. You know, one of the things they said to me, we don't want technology for technology's sake. And on the other side of that, I literally vetted out hundreds of vendors, and these were vendors from around the world. And often what I heard was, yeah, I get what you're trying to do. I'm going to put this template over what they're saying, and the students are going to do everything, and you're going to love it. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but I knew, because I had that relationship with my clients, to understand what's important to them and what kind of learning that they were trying to apply, that was never going to fly. And I wouldn't let those folks get anywhere near my client, because these were two founders who were highly educated, highly successful former teachers who now had a education company that was going to become a digital education company, right? And so they still had the analog components of that, which were very, very well received. And now they want to have the digital components of that, and they don't want to ruin what's already there. They wanted to parallel that. So I spent a lot of time doing flip chart work, whiteboard work, having conversations, what if, with the founders, with the leaders, with the folks that were in the field, even with some of their competitors, even with folks who were exemplars in the field, because I really needed to get an understanding of what's important to them and why. Because I realized I couldn't just say, hey, I'll bring in vendor X and they'll give you everything you need. Just put down, $700,000 and off they'll go. And that was never going to fly. Right. So, and then the higher ed side, it was really like, it was an LMS implementation. And what they needed for me was they needed somebody to be the strategic eyes to say, all the groups aligned to get to where they need to be. So I needed to bring my experience and my knowledge of what that means to work with learning management systems and what to watch out for. And I had to build, which were difficult conversations, had to build relationships with people across the board, even though I reported to the president of the university. And I didn't want them to perceive me as looking over their shoulder, which is essentially what I was doing. But I had to connect with them in such a way to say, look, My job is to help everybody move forward and to bring my experiences to bear. And I'm not going to step in areas that I shouldn't be in. I just want to get the temperature of what's happening. So that's a
Yeah.
long way to say it 2 different ways.
Well, it does sound like understanding that structure is a critical component of all this.
I think so. And I know that everyone doesn't have that luxury. I mean, I think often it really depends on a particular instructional designer, e-learning person's organization and how they're structured. You may not have these opportunities, but when you do, I think if you have this methodology of thinking about the people, the processes, and the best practices and connecting with them, it's going to help you propel that relationship forward.
Yeah. And Lisa has a great point in chat. She says, the best place I ever sat in an organization was when I reported to finance instead of HR. It's an entirely different focus. And I
absolutely.
Yeah. And so understanding that structure is, I mean, you could see right there, that's totally critical.
Yeah. I mean, I was fortunate when I worked with these founders that they were small enough, there were less than 20 people, even though they're spread out across the country, that they let me into the room. You know what I mean? They let me see behind the curtain, but I had to build that trust and I had to build that relationship. Not everyone's going to have that opportunity, but I do think if you have this kind of framework of trying to understand who they are and understand what you can bring, it's a better chance for you to partner and move away from just being an order taker.
Yeah. And J Rock is saying that is a key skill. How does one get better at walking into a situation and mapping the power lines to know who can say yes or no to a project? And I totally, yeah, that is a key skill, being able to do that.
Yeah, you can almost say that's an analog skill versus a digital skill. That's something that's a little bumpier, that takes time, and there's going to be some successes and some failures. I can say also, I'm a little bit older. I've had a lot of work and experience in a lot of different arenas, and I've learned kind of the hard way because I came in with a very strong technology background. I had to learn to build relationships with people, to meet people for coffee, to go to after work events, to sit in on meetings that I wasn't part of so that I can try to understand the bigger picture of what's happening. So that's something that I think you develop over time, unless you have a culture of an organization that invites you in from the beginning, which I had with my education client in the K through 12 space. So jumping forward, because I want to be cognizant of time, I want to jump to the second objective. And before I get there, I just want to share this idea is that I've learned in the work I've done in graduate schools that organizations are made up of humans, and we're complex and we have our own skills and challenges. And I think, again, that's another one of the ideas that I think helped me understand that even though people are very skilled, very powerful, and have a lot of ideas and expectations, they're still humans, and you have to meet them where they're at and see what you can bring to the table. So that kind of dovetails, I think, nicely with the next two objectives. And the second one that I want to talk about is understanding the unique challenges of your customer's organization and your culture. And this is based on the work that I did in graduate school with a professor named Gerard Egan at Loyola University of Chicago. And he used this model, which I'm calling Model A, B, and C. And the idea of the model that he worked with is it's a way to provide a framework to understand your organization that you're working with, so you understand how they're organized, and a little bit about their culture and a little bit about the dynamics of how they work. And why that's important is because anytime you're working in an e-learning implementation, you're moving people from where they are now to some other place. So by definition, you're dealing with change, and change is hard. And most people don't like change, even the people that are supposed to be change management consultants. It's hard. But this model helps provide a framework to say, Model A is, where is your customer now? What learning solution do they have in place? How do they work every day? How do they function? What are the key components of the learning that they provide for their users? How are they organized? What are some of the key challenges that they have? And to get an idea of what that is. And so they've brought me in, or they bring people in to say, okay, I want to build a new learning solution, or I want to adapt an existing learning solution, and I want to move from where I am now, which is Model A, to Model B. And it's kind of like, you can't really see it in the screen, but you're moving from down here to where they are now to up here to a new ideal of what the learning solution might look like. So you're helping people to think about, if I have a learning solution now that works strictly on, let's say, laptops, and I need to go into a learning solution that's going to be multiple device, multiple browser, have multiple browser capability, and people could use it on their phones, they can use it on their iPads, they could use it on any device that gets online, and it's going to be a browser-based solution. That's a big ask. So that's the ideal, and there's nothing wrong with talking about that, but you have to articulate and have that conversation with those folks to say, if you're down here in your existing learning solution, single device, and you want to go up here, a lot of changes are going to happen. And you have to kind of document that and think about that. Again, have those conversations, say, here you are now, Model A, Model B, here's where you want to be. What do we need to do to get you there? What are the key components? And you're having conversations with the leadership, with the frontline folks, with the users. You're having conversations with your peers to kind of, level set for yourself. You could even have conversation with exemplars out there who are actually doing what your client wants to do, so you can take away what's important, and then you could share with them, again, to build the comfort level. So in Egan's model, it's 3 phases. Model A, where are they now? Model B, where do they want to be? And below that, you could say Model C. And Model C could be described as the shadow side, or what's getting in the way. We all know that we want to build a new learning solution, and we're here. We need to go here to the new learning solution. And historically, we found that it's really hard. It's difficult to build a new learning solution without making mistakes, right? Without having things fail, without people getting frustrated or lost. And what the model for Gerard Egan says is that's natural and that's normal, that he calls this the shadow side, the things that are below the Model A and Model B, how people think about work, how people do their work, and the things that are positive and the things that are negative. They're not always listed in the job titles. They're not listed in the org chart. These are the things, as a consultant or as even an internal consultant, you have to kind of peel back the layers carefully to understand, how do people support the learning solution now? How do they want to do that? What do you think is going to get in the way? Are you going to have more digital skills? Are you going to have more developers on the table, on the team? Are you going to have to provide a learning solution for hundreds or thousands more users? And if you are, what might that mean as you speculate and predict how that learning solution is going to be put into place? So this framework of Model A, B, and C helps you kind of understand that your client, your partners, they're on a trajectory that's taking them from where they are now to where they want to be. It's an upward trajectory. There's a lot of challenges and pitfalls, and there's a lot of things below it that can get in the way, and that's normal. But if we're able to, again, build on the idea of having a relationship and partnering with folks, we can help ourselves understand what that is, help our teams understand. And if we have these confidential, collaborative relationships with our customers, with our clients, we can talk to them about, here's what I see happening for your team if they're resisting the change, if they're resisting going from the learning solution to the new learning solution. And you're not tattling on them. You're not telling on them. You're just sharing, these are some of the challenges that you have, and you're hoping to be, you want to do that at the beginning of the project and throughout the project. You don't want to wait till the end when you say, okay, we come up with a new learning solution. It's all going to be great. Everyone's happy. Everyone's on board, because it's just not going to work like that. So to have those conversations and kind of dig around carefully and confidentially into what might be getting in the way helps you surface some of the things that impact how people do their jobs. And one just quick example of like a shadow side activity or shadow side example is, years and years ago, I was working in the R&D world. And one of the things I had to do as an engineer was go to the manufacturing floor, because that's where our devices were built. And one of the things that I was fortunate, some colleagues said, well, Danny, before you go on the manufacturing floor, I want you to be aware there's a lot of people there, a lot of activity, and you're going to notice there's yellow lines painted on the floor. And those yellow lines mark out territory. And your job is to stay out of that territory, walk this neat, narrow pathway to get where you need to be. And don't cross those lines, because if you do, someone's going to get mad and they're going to yell at you because you don't belong there. And that was a strange thing to me, because all they were painted lines on the ground, or basically on the floor of the manufacturing facility. But that's how that facility worked. That's their shadow side. that wasn't written down anywhere. Nobody said that in the management. Whenever you go to the manufacturing floor, be sure you don't go across those lines. One of my colleagues told me that, and that helped me understand that now I'm in somebody else's turf, and there are other rules that apply, and I need to connect with these people, and I need to be respectful of what their rules are and how they do things. And that's just kind of a little tiny example of what a shadow side activity may be. And I would just add that shadow side activities can be positive and they can be negative. They're not one or the other. So sometimes, from a positive perspective, people get things done because they know, even though the org chart says I need to talk to Joe over here, I can go talk to somebody else who knows how to do this work, and they're going to help me understand what's important. I always have to go to Joe because that's just not how things are done. And now you're not subverting that person. You're just gaining some insights of how to get things done. And so, long story short, the idea there is to understand that organizations are complex. You might start out here, you're going to be going up and with a more sophisticated solution. And there's a lot of things that can impact how folks move through that. So then the last kind of bullet I want to just kind of jump forward to is the idea of managing change. And when you're talking about building a solution, building a new learning solution, you're dealing with change, and change is hard for everybody. And I just want to share a quote that I have from the Gartner Group that I think really helps us understand that when we're dealing with helping our partners and clients and to get through where they want to be, to get this new learning solution, they're going through a change, and that's not always easy and it's difficult. And so the quote that I love, it says that while there are many reasons why people will resist change, most of the reasons have something to do with the feeling of loss. Some people feel a strong loss of security or predictability. Others feel a loss of control or power over their resources. So I think that's really powerful because part of that research also said that a third of the time, change initiatives are only successful about a third of the time. So that's most of the time change initiatives fail. And that's across the board, not just e-learning. That's any kind of change that happens. And I think that kind of gives us a perspective that dealing with change and understanding that people are going through change is an important thing. And that our job, again, is to partner and help them and to be empathetic and understanding what they're going through. I don't know how we're doing with time, Luis.
I think we're good. I mean, yeah, I do want to see if anybody has any questions. Feel free to post them in chat or add them to the Ask a Questions section of the interface. I do want to ask you, Danny, how much of this work do you do, like, say, as an independent, as a freelancer or contractor before you sign on to a project? How much of this work do you actually do?
I think you have to have an initial conversation and maybe a series of conversations to kind of peel back the layers of what it is that your customer, your client wants to accomplish, whether it's internal or not. Because I think you want to set realistic expectations of what can be accomplished. So I think, as an independent, I would much rather turn work away if I have that conversation with them and realize that what they're asking for is way too much for either me to handle or might not even be realistic for anybody to handle. I think we all have been inundated with commercials, with digital, these beautiful things that you see from Apple or from Google that make it look like these people can open their computer or open their phone and create all this great content that just flies out of the screen like a bird and just lands on everybody's devices, and everything's great. What they don't realize, it costs millions of dollars to make those commercials, and they don't always reflect the reality of what's happening. So I think to spend as much time to get to know what the expectations are and what their goals are early on is going to help, I think, set me up for a better chance for success than for me just taking on whatever project that comes my way and saying, I'll make it work. Because I just think digital technologies, methodologies for getting stuff done, there's just a lot going on. There's a lot of time and money and resources put on there, and the expectations are high. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important to have those conversations early and figure out how realistic things are.
So you learn this stuff, like, seasoned veteran, in this space, you had to have failed at some of these items.
Oh,
which
definitely. Most
is there
definitely.
can you give us an instance of, like, even just with the first one, understanding customer structure? Is there like is there a lesson learned in there where you can share with us, where you know, I don't know if you dove into something without understanding that structure and you're like, oh, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I could go back to when I worked with a clinical pharmacy group and I was actually internal. And one of the things that they wanted to do was they wanted to train their pharmacists and their nurses on what sound clinical processes and procedures were. And I thought, well, I can just do some research. I can write all this up. I can put it in a nice, neat package and have somebody work with me, and I'll just toss it out there and they'll love it. And what I didn't realize was the level of education and the specialty sector of specialty pharmacists. These are people who are doing infusions, they're working with super powerful drugs, they're working with clients in their homes or in hospitals, and they have a set of rules and regulations and how they function that are industry specific and vetted out by professional organizations and vary depending on the organization. I couldn't just pick up, hey, here's a customer service class that I found online and I'm going to put it in PowerPoint for you. I really had to realize, I had realized that along the difficult way that what I was proposing just wasn't going to fly. And what I learned also for dealing with pharmacists and nurses who deal with life and death situations, they would just tell me, this is never going to work. I don't know why you're going, Bart, I don't know why you're going up this path. And that was a hard lesson because when I was used to being either the expert on the engineering side or the expert on the education side, and if I put something together in the financial services group that I worked with, which was a big group, you just kind of like stepping along, doing what you need to do. When I was working with a smaller, more sophisticated, more powerful in terms of education level, there's a level of expectations I didn't really understand. And that was my fault for maybe being too timid to dig in and say, let's talk about what are the regulatory bodies or regulatory agencies that you feel like you need to meet? Because if you meet these pharmacists and you meet these nurses, excuse me, you realize they're very, very well educated, not only in their undergrad, graduate, and PhD level, but they have to be certified all the time. They have to maintain their continuing education credits, and they have to work in highly stressful environments. They don't have time to mess around, and they need to make sure that what they're spending their time on has been vetted out, reflects best practices, and would stand scrutiny from the outside world. Is that a good example?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That totally makes sense. And that's not something that, you know, I mean, it feels like you can only learn that from experience. So that is, that's a great point. J Rock has a question here for you. Organizationally speaking, what is the shelf life of an e-learning? Are they meant to last, or are they better when they are just for a time and meant to be inactivated later? That's a great question. I've never considered that.
I would say it's hard to say. I would say it really depends on the organization and the content that you're using. In my K through 12 client, they had a methodology that they spent years and years developing. And that core part of their methodology and how we put together a blended learning, that was never going to change. But if they put things that were addendums to that technology that allowed them to upload documents, to create and modify documents, to annotate things, and to share things between teachers and students, those things were additional. But if I were thinking about my corporate clients, let's say in the financial services world, and they're providing financial services software to their clients, that stuff has a very short shelf life because the finance world changes all the time. Even though it's regulated, what products they sell, what services they support, they're going to change. So 1 to 2 years would be a long time. Could be a long time, right?
Yeah. Kim's saying, I have a project right now where the course will be relevant for about 6 months and another one that will probably be used for 5 years or more.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. Just going into like starting a project, is that something that you actually like define or consider? It's like, okay, so we're building this. This is only going to be good for a year. So, we're only going to allocate X amount of resources to it because this is, since it's a finance thing and it's about this particular topic, I don't know. Is that something that that folks consider? And I love the fact that we have so many e-learning devs in the chat right now too. So
yeah, I think it varies. It really depends on the organization, and it also depends on the need. I mean, as I said at the beginning, if your leadership sees, this is like the whole idea of needs assessment. They see that their employees or their staff are here and they need to get to this point. Sometimes they're happy just you help them push to get to that point, and then they forgot and they move on to the next problem. Because we all know in a lot of organizations, people are dealing with a lot of distractions and a lot of challenges every day. And if you can help them move forward with it, and if it's a small project and it makes a difference, it's gonna, they're gonna do it and they're gonna move on and they're gonna be appreciative, but they're gonna forget it within a few months and move on to what have you done for me lately.
Nice. Okay, a couple more questions. J Rock's asking, how long should a freelancer keep the source files after delivering the SCORM zip?
That's a good question. I think it depends. I have no idea really. I would just
how much storage you have.
Yeah. How big of a project is it? How much storage do you have? How long is your contract? Can you offload it to them?
Yeah, Lisa's saying she keeps hers for 5 years. That's on a junk drive. That's great. Rakesh is asking, what do organizations generally seek as methodology? That is constructivism or problem solving?
I can only generalize from my experience. I think from the organizations I work, it is problem solving, right? How do I get my content online? Or how do I improve the content that I have online so that's multiple device, multiple browser? It's really a problem solving. Or going back to my pharmaceutical, group, it was, I need to get, once I figured out the lay of the land, how do I get my pharmacist continuing education credit? Can you help me figure that out? Fortunately, I had a clinical director who was demanding but cool. And I had at my fingertips a programmer right around the corner who was willing to work with me. And then we created this continuing education curriculum out of scratch. But, that's just that situation. I think everybody's going to have a different experience.
Wow, this has been excellent stuff today, Danny.
Well,
Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, I love the topic, and I actually would love to talk more about this with people that work in house, like like Kim and J Rock and Peacock that are out there. Cindy, maybe we could follow up with another conversation that talks less about rather than just e-learning developer stuff, like specific, working within an interface, but just these soft skills, because this is really, really important. And so I appreciate you bringing this out here, Danny.
Thank you, Luis.
Is it okay if I post your LinkedIn?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to. And I would just add that, a lot of what I've learned is from the School of Hard Knocks. Nobody said to me, hey, Danny, when you become a consultant, you should know these things. Mm-hmm. It became kind of a reflection on my education, my reflection of my experience, and taking the time to think about what would work for me if I did it a little bit differently. And how can I avoid being this order taker person?
Yeah, no, this is decades worth of experience, like coming out here.
I earned these gray hairs for not for nothing.
I appreciate you sharing. Danny, thanks so much for spending the time with us today. And everybody, I want to remind you, Thursday, we've got Summer Community Day happening. Join us. Career development, we're going to be talking. It's looking great so far. The speaker lineup is fantastic, and I think Thursday is going to be a really, really fun day. So join us for that. And if you want, I'm doing just a quick broadcast tomorrow morning where we'll be talking about how to use AirMeet and just the day in general. So I'll be here tomorrow as well. And with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Thanks again, Danny. Thanks everybody for joining us
everyone.
today. And
appreciate your time.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.